Penguin Random House Canada presents Trust, 20 Ways to Build a Better Country by David Johnston, read for you by the author. Introduction. An Invitation to Trust. You have likely heard or read the popular expression about the importance of courage. Courage, the saying goes, is the first of human qualities because it is the one that guarantees all others. I am not convinced. I have a quality in mind that supersedes even courage in significance: trust. The Oxford English Dictionary defines trust as a firm belief in the reliability, truth, or ability of someone or something, or the acceptance of the truth of a statement without proof. While these definitions are technically accurate in capturing trust as a state of being and work in progress, these interpretations are far too modest in my eyes. Trust is bigger, more complex, and ultimately more important to us than any pedantic dictionary definition supplies. Trust is the bedrock of democracy. Democracy in Canada and in countries around the world depends on a rule of law that strives toward justice. That rule of law depends on trust, a trust in each other as citizens, and a trust between citizens and the institutions that stand for and serve them. Trust in these relationships means sharing a belief in basic facts. People who trust are reluctant to tailor facts to their views instead of their views to the facts. Trust in these relationships means knowing certain fundamental truths exist. People who trust are disinclined to trade in half-truths, myths, falsehoods, and conspiracy theories, even if these fictions serve individual interests. Trust in these relationships does not mean those of us in democracies must agree upon absolutely everything, yet it does mean we must acknowledge the real state of the world. There is such a thing as truth. There are such things as facts. Objective journalism is possible. History can be learned and learned from. If one does not consider anything to be true, if one believes facts are fungible commodities, if one thinks journalism is a sham and history a con, then the rule of law cannot work. And if the rule of law cannot work, then our democracy and its institutions are doomed. These are the stakes. I raise them not merely to cause alarm, but so all Canadians can give trust the careful attention it demands. Strangely enough, trust is not something we spend much time contemplating. We tend to think little about trust because it is a curious quality that is almost always more noticeable in its absence than its presence, as something much more likely to be lost than gained. This tendency is particularly pronounced among Canadians. We trust other drivers on the road to stop their vehicles when traffic lights turn red. We trust that individuals with similar incomes will get comparable treatment at tax time. And we trust the institutions and officials who represent and serve us to make decisions without favor to themselves and their friends. If we could not trust in these and countless other basic ways, our lives as individuals and our collective life as a country would be thrown into turmoil. As sociologist Nicholas Luhmann wrote, an absence of trust would prevent us from getting up in the morning. While it is something that most of us take for granted, trust is a vital quality that grows stronger as it is acknowledged and then cultivated attentively. I think Hugh MacLennan's analogy of civilization as a garden and civilized people as gardeners comes the closest to capturing trust in our democratic way of life as the living, breathing result of careful thought and deliberate action. In Voices in Time, a novel that depicts a world in the wake of a nuclear holocaust, MacLennan writes, "In the relatively rare periods in the past that we call civilized, people understood that a civilization is like a garden cultivated in a jungle. As flowers and vegetables grow from cultivated seeds, so do civilizations grow from carefully studied, diligently examined ideas and perceptions. In nature, if there are no gardeners, the weeds that need no cultivation take over the garden and destroy it." To alter MacLennan's analogy slightly, trust is a flowering seed that must be cultivated, and we must be its diligent gardeners. Philosopher and ethicist Cecil Bach backs up this idea. Whatever matters to human beings, Dr. Bach wrote, trust is the atmosphere in which it thrives. Trust is not thriving in democracies today. According to Edelman, the global public relations company that has surveyed trust in countries around the world for 2 decades, trust in nearly all these countries is decreasing, dramatically so in some places. This lack of trust is a reflection and result of 3 interlocking trends. First, our current lack of trust is a consequence of the collapse of the liberal democratic consensus in the West that stayed largely intact for some 5 decades following the end of the Second World War. This consensus, albeit one formed largely by and for white men, held that employers would supply decent pay, generous benefits, and healthy pensions to large swaths of the workforce. It further held that governments would create legal frameworks to regulate all manner of business and industry, address labor disputes, and limit the number and power of monopolies. And it also held that unions would play central roles in advancing gradually the overall welfare of not only workers, but also marginalized groups such as women and people of color. Second, our current lack of trust is a reaction to the income stagnation and economic inequalities brought on by globalization in trade and commerce, technological disruption that has eliminated many traditional jobs and created a new super-wealthy elite, and the seeming helplessness, or in some cases apparent unwillingness, of democratic governments and other public institutions to redress these inequalities. And third, our current lack of trust is a product of the digital age that has made information limitless and communication not merely instantaneous, but also constant. This age was meant to connect and enlighten us, and it has. Yet, it has also amplified our anger, stoked our fears, and indulged our pessimism, which often override the connectedness and enlightenment, and which mischief-makers have encouraged to undermine our trust in our public institutions and each other. This lack of trust globally troubles me, and the unstable state of trust in Canada gives me acute concern. I've spent much of my adult life contemplating trust. I started as a young law professor who was serving part-time as the very green research counsel to the Ontario Securities Commission, responsible for crafting new securities regulations for the province. Our 3 main goals in developing the rules were to reinforce confidence in the efficiency and integrity of the nation's capital markets, enhance the likelihood that credit would be used prudently and would increase prosperity, and ultimately assure Ontarians their deposits, savings, and pensions were secure and the trading of securities was honest and transparent, a fair deal. I realized through this work that the proper functioning of capital markets depended ultimately on the trust of depositors and investors, and that the duty of the provincial regulator was to create and maintain rules and associated conditions necessary for that trust. My understanding of trust grew over the years as I became more aware of its application and value beyond the laws of finance and into private enterprises and public institutions, communities, and countries, and most fundamentally, among individuals. So, what should we do to stabilize and revive trust? Well, we cannot restore the post-war consensus, erase all the imperfections of globalization, and shut down the web. We can take meaningful action. We must first acknowledge that genuine trust is a kind of faith not leaped into blindly. Trust is gained through our actions and decisions, on our doing and not merely saying, on the basis of evidence that can be observed and measured rationally. As philosopher Honora O'Neill said during the 2002 edition of the BBC Wraith Lectures, well-placed trust grows out of active inquiry rather than blind acceptance. Equipped with this understanding, we can then, with eyes wide open, identify, explore, and evaluate the attitudes, habits, and approaches that make a person trustworthy, that make a business, organization, or public institution trustworthy, and that make a country trustworthy. If we then start thinking and acting in the most effective ways, as individuals and professionals, as leaders and aspiring leaders, As representatives of
Sample complete. Ready to continue?